Hey guys, Dantics here, back with some more exciting Crimson Desert news. The most immediate piece of good news is that, at release at least, there'll be no microtransactions or cosmetic shop or anything like that. Which means that even though the devs have come from the Black Desert MMO, Crimson Desert will be a true single player experience, unencumbered by a lot of the bloat we've seen in games recently. We've also had confirmation that even though Crimson Desert has a lot of features made popular by Breath of the Wild, there will be no weapon durability. Weapons will not break after repeated use, which I'm glad for, because even though I felt like the durability system was good for the Zelda universe, that was because the game had a more survival feel to it. Pulling off branches to use as makeshift weapons is great because it makes you feel like you're struggling to get by. But in Crimson Desert, it's more about pulling down giant pillars and using them as massive weapons. It's a power fantasy rather than a survival one. Speaking of which, it seems confirmed you can equip almost anything as a weapon. Here's the player pole vaulting with what looks to be a banner and slamming down, so they seem to have their own attacks as well. Using the physics engine and the environment to approach challenges your way is something that has a lot of people excited. Now, I know I've mentioned Zelda a lot, but it's just hard not to. In this case, Crimson Desert's progression is also tied to exploration and discovery. What that means is that there isn't an experience bar. You won't be leveling up. Instead, you'll be rewarded by completing quests and exploring with new gear, weapons, and abyss artifacts that let you grow your power and gain new abilities. I personally think that's the way to make these seamless open worlds. It means finding or earning abyss artifacts is genuinely rewarding, as you'll be able to afford the new skill, upgrade, or attribute that you've been saving for. Enemies don't scale, which means going to an area you're not ready for will be hard, but when you find better gear or better skills, module weapons, etc., you'll start living out a power fantasy where previously hard enemies become extremely easy when you return to them. No levels means weapons also don't need to scale up. You're not finding a third level 20 steel spear that you ultimately need to trash. This leaves room for different types of weapons to find, which encourages build diversity. We've already seen a ton of different types, from warhammers, pole arms, war axes, and more. Modding and refining weapons also feels like an actual upgrade. No leveling also means you aren't grinding out enemies, you're exploring and hunting for the next loot fix, rather than finding the most efficient XP farm methods, which YouTube would have been flooded with. Some people have asked if you can focus on ranged combat. We don't have a solid confirmation on that, but here are some reasons why I feel as though you can. First, the elements. You might have seen the extra magical jumps you can make in most footage just using nature power, but if you switch elements, it uses that element instead. For example, using lightning will have you jump up and shock enemies. Your abilities change based on the element you have equipped, as does your ranged attacks. Ice freezes, fire blasts them away. Also keep in mind you can equip different ammo types as well, like explosive ammos and the ability to call down an artillery barrage. So ranged weapons have multiple ways to be effective. Also, we see here the player cheesing some enemies not able to reach him. It's not like your ranged basic attack has a cooldown. Now, before you start, yes, it does look silly that you can cheese enemies, but it's a massive open world. Of course you can cheese basic enemies. You can even drop their own buildings on their heads without ever fighting them. This would only be worrying if you can do it to bosses. Now, some fun little tidbits. You may have noticed that in some of the footage you can interact with animals. Well, you can pet the dogs and you can even pet your mounts. It's unclear if you'll be able to keep the mounts that you can steal from your enemies, like this bear, but certainly an interesting mechanic to be able to GTA style hijack rides. Now, some of you might be worried about progression since there aren't levels. I've already shown in the previous video that you can invest your abyss artifacts into skills and upgrades, but it also seems like we have a few different slots for gear and weapons. So even though it's not an MMO and not a true RPG with leveling, you will gain power by filling out these slots. You have your health, you have stamina to dictate your special attacks and traversal, you have spirit for magical attacks, attack power, defense, accuracy with your ranged attacks, your attack speed, movement speed, and crit chance. What's interesting is that attack and movement speed seem to be increased in pips rather than numbers. So do you only see an increase for reaching the next pip, or is this just a way to display there is a minimum and maximum that can be leveled up? And by that, of course, I don't mean you actually level up, but you invest into them with your Abyss artifacts. Now, I mentioned stamina. It seems in the early footage, we saw it being used to execute basic attacks, as you can see here. However, it has since been changed to only be consumed during your special attacks, which is a nice change considering you can now use basics while your stamina recharges instead of the combat slowing to a crawl. Stamina is also used for traversal like climbing and gliding, so no doubt investing in it early will be a good way to increase your power. Stamina will also be used for grappling and throwing. Here you can see you can throw your enemies off cliffs or into hazards like fire, which will affect them. Now, the story is one area we haven't heard much about. The game could have all the mechanics and tools in the world to make it so you can craft your own story, but I still appreciate the devs putting effort to drive the game forward themselves. We know the game will have an antagonist in the Black Bears and Muradin, so perhaps there's more to the Civil War than trying to rebuild your ancestral home. It seems like he's looking for something the Greymanes have, and refusing it has the antagonist saying,
"Bring me the others. The hunt has begun."
The hunt has begun, meaning the story could follow you finding the rest and protecting them, perhaps defending against sieges and the like. We'll just have to wait and see, though I foresee building up your base and defending it will be some kind of final mission where you have to protect from a black bear invasion. Going back and looking at some of the earlier footage, I noticed this little detail. Changing your gear to the banquet attire before entering the castle event makes the guards think you're less of a troublemaker and they just let you in.
We don't look like the troublemaking type.
Right, he can pass then.
Open the gate.
Head on.
In a seamless open world, I can foresee a lot of little interactions like this, where there are multiple ways to get around fighting or entering areas or even finishing missions based on information and items you collect through exploration. Keep in mind, entering this castle is part of the mission Alchemist Traces, and it didn't instruct you to enter this castle this way, only that you need to seek out the Alchemist room within the castle. It's after this quest you get the ability to glide. You can truly see the scope of the world, it's massive. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean there'll be a ton to do, that the place will be dense, but the devs have come out to say the game has hundreds of hours of content, so it all kind of lines up. You can go where you can see, and there's a lot to see. During combat, you'll notice you can knock around enemies. Knocking them into walls seems to do a ton of damage, so I'm hoping that means creative physics-based ways of taking out enemies is worth doing, like using the environment against them. This isn't much, but it's worth pointing out. This is the first time in the game, at least a game like this, that I've seen an NPC give you your payment up front. An Abyss artifact, which you collect to power up your characters, is given to you before you even rescue the healer this fellow mentions. It's a wonder if you'll get more for following through or if it's just for your own satisfaction. You'll notice when you rescue the healer, there's a section over him called Goodwill. You can most likely raise this by being nice to him and giving gifts, but it's still unclear why you would want to raise the goodwill of NPCs, beyond of course the cheaper services and perhaps some extra missions. Speaking of extra, the game seems to be strong enough to throw a lot of extra enemies at you at once. Hopefully, doing so doesn't just devolve into you rolling and blocking every half second. What's nice is that different types of enemies have different attacks. In this case, we're fighting a group of goblins who, two completely different parties, two completely different factions, wanted us to fight for their own reasons. So there seems to be multiple avenues and rewards for some missions. You could go back to one of the factions, get your reward, and then go back to another and get your rewards. So there is a lot to this game. And that's everything Crimson Desert for now. I will be back with a ton more Crimson Desert content, so you're in the right place. Ciao, friends.